Hey folks, today we're going to start our actual first unit. Um, and it's going to be on textual development. So this is like the first real English work that we're going to get going on. Um, so let's start diving in. So what I mean when I say textual development is specifically what we're going to be looking at is I can analyze one of those verbs with support, another one of those verbs, how a person's structural choices contribute to a text's overall meaning. And to help us do that, we're going to use a tool called Annotation to help us analyze the text. So let's take a look at what that actually means. So in order to um, analyze the structure and support our ideas to figure out overall meaning, we have to break that down. That's a really big, kind of scary thing to be able to do without looking at the requisite parts. So what I'm going to expect us all to be able to do is we need to first start with figuring out what those main ideas are. I can't really structurally analyze something if I don't know what I'm analyzing. So first part is we've got to understand those main ideas. And I'm looking at both explicit summary, what's on the surface level of a text or a poem or a painting. And I'm going to have us take a look at inferential understanding. So that's the kind of reading between the lines of a story. We're going to have to analyze that. We're going to have to break those stories down into the pieces and the parts that we see. And then we're going to have to start taking a look at structure. Okay, so if I know this is where this author is headed or where this artist or songwriter or whatever it is you're looking at, I know what they're trying to tell me, and I can kind of see the parts. Understanding the structure means we start looking at how did they do that? What were the pieces and the choices that they made as an artist or an author to get us to those conclusions about their main ideas. And then lastly, when we're putting this all together, we've got to be able to support our answers. We've got to be able to identify and use relevant evidence to back up what we think in order to show why our thoughts and our remarks and our claims are relevant and accurate. So the way I'll start with every unit is we got to think about this idea of why are we doing this? A lot of times in school, we'll just say, do this, and then we do this. But we don't really think about the bigger reason as to why I'm asking you to do this. So I want you to take a second and pause and think about, okay, why would it be important that I'd be able to look at something's overall meaning and figure out how the artist or the author got there? So what I think, hopefully after you've given it some time to process yourself, is if we can start figuring out how and why an author did something, we can start to figure out their motivations behind it. Like, are they trying to convince us of something? Are they trying to manipulate us of something? Especially in a world where we're going into an election year and we see all sorts of product placement and advertisement saying, hey, you need this thing. We've got to figure out, okay, why and how are you manipulating me? Why and how are you making me feel angry or sad or happy? And so I think getting to the bottom of how an author does that really helps us understand that author's motivation or that artist's or that politician's motivation. So we're going to start this process by looking at some poetry. So we're going to look at a poem with the purpose of analyzing its structural elements. And first thing we need to do is we need to familiarize ourselves again with some of those structural elements of poetry. I'm not just going to go say, hey, analyze the structure of poetry without actually giving you some vocabulary and some tools to use to help figure out the structure. So these are the main ones that we're going to look at. Obviously, poems can be comprised of many more linguistic and physical elements than just this, but I think for the poem that we're going to read, these are going to be the main ones that we'll take a look at. So let's break this down into piece by piece. So I think most of us know these things, but let's see if I can get here. Yeah. If we're going to be talking about line breaks, what I mean is, so line breaks are going to be anytime the author decides to end a line of poetry and go on to the next one. Those are important. That's a structural choice that author is making. I want to stop this line here and start the next one there. And sometimes that line break is just to fit the flow of the poem or to make sure things rhyme, but other times it has more important elements than just that. So we have to look at them deeply. We're going to take a look at stanzas. So stanzas just mean basically the paragraphs of poems. So why did the author or the artist or the poet decide to break this poem up into groups of 4 in this particular case? Syntax is a really big English word. Syntax basically means how did they put these words together? Syntax is just the order of a sentence structure. So why did they start this sentence with this subject and then go into this verb to describe it? Why didn't they flip that around? Or why is this coming first and this coming second? Or why did they decide to make this sentence a huge long run-on? Or why did they make this sentence a fragment? We'll look at rhyme. Hopefully you guys know what rhyme is. Rhyme is just if it's there. Why is this author deciding to use a rhyme scheme? And then meter is just kind of the flow of the poem. Is it smooth and does it have a cadence, or is it really choppy and disjointed? Those things might have an effect on the reader as they're understanding the poem. So those are the physical things that you can actually see in a poem. And then we'll get into the linguistic things, like imagery. Imagery is going to be basically appealing to the 5 senses. So I will, if I can, put this up here. So imagery, we're looking at the 5 senses. Does it paint a picture? Can you see what they're saying? Are they using particularly vivid imagery? Metaphors and similes are just comparisons. Simile would be he was big like a truck, right? He's not actually a truck. He's just a large person. Or a metaphor might be something, a comparison where we're not using that word like or as. So you could say the snow was a blanket on the hills. And that doesn't literally mean that someone got out and crocheted a blanket of snow and then laid it really nicely over the hills. They're just they're contrasting the snow looking like a blanket, like someone draped snow over a hill. Synecdoche, this is probably one that you haven't come across a whole lot, but it's basically meaning using a part to represent a whole. So if you've ever heard the phrase all hands on deck, that doesn't really mean cut off your hands and throw them on the deck of a ship. It's a representation saying everyone get up here, we need all of your help, right? The hands are a representation of the sailors, and the deck hands is where that comes from. And then the last kind of linguistic element we'll look at is repetition. So this could be alliteration, which is the starting sounds. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. That's alliteration, where I'm starting each word with a similar sound. Or it could just be a repetition of phrases or ideas. If a poet brings up a line and then repeats it or echoes it throughout the poem, that's going to be an important element as well. So those are the structural elements of the poetry that we're going to be looking at. And the second thing that we're going to do is try to annotate a poem. And I don't know if you guys have had this problem in school where you read something and then you look up and you look back down and you realize, oh my God, I don't remember a thing that I just read. It happens all the time, especially in academic reading. So what annotating is just literally taking notes on a text so we can help kind of download our thinking process as we're reading. It's a good engagement technique. It keeps you kind of focused on the reading. And also, if you do have those mental lapses where you get distracted or look away or even just check your phone, rub your eyes because things are so boring, you can come back and have an idea of what it was you were thinking as you were reading. So here's an example of annotation if you were doing it like handwriting. And you can see this whoever was reading this poem was doing an excellent job of just making connections and asking questions and defining words, highlighting important passages as they were going. So obviously this will look a little bit different since most of the work that we're going to be doing isn't going to be on physical paper. So what we're going to use, if I can pull this up, let's zoom in a little bit, maybe. There we go. Is we're going to be using the comment tool, which is this guy right up here. So say I read a stanza. One of my directions for this reading this poem is I'm going to have you summarize each stanza. So I might highlight the stanza title and click either this add comment button or this comment button, and I would write my short summary here. Comment that. And so now whenever I come back and click on that, see how it kind of highlights that comment? Or maybe I thought like this and go in like a soft bullet, like there's a cool simile. So I could write that, get my face out of the way, if I could spell simile right. And then I could explain why it's interesting. Comment there. That's what we're going to be working on with this poem in terms of annotation. So your assignment will be to read this poem that I have posted up on Google Classroom. And there's some questions at the end that I'm going to ask you to attempt to answer. And remember, this is the first time we're really doing some pretty in-depth English work. It's kind of our starting point, so don't freak out. I just want you to do your best. And remember our targets. Our main goals in this are we're practicing that explicit summary that we had. That was one of the things that we had to do at the very beginning. We had to determine the main ideas. So first part of that is just, okay, what am I seeing? What are the main ideas that I can like physically see going on in this poem? We're going to start to figure out some of the inferential ideas. Those are like, what are the main points this author is trying to make? And then we're going to just start to identify some of the structural elements used. So I can really see that this poet is using stanzas in a really interesting way, or I can see that this poet is really trying to use metaphor or imagery to paint a picture. And maybe we don't have a full description of what that all looks like yet. I just want us to get to the idea of identifying what that poet is using. All right. So again, just to review our learning targets, here's where we're going with the long-term thing. We are working on analyzing textual development. And what that means is I can analyze with support how a person's structural choices contribute to a text's overall meaning. And I'm going to practice that skill of annotation to help me get there. So I've got some assignments posted up in Google Classroom. I want you to go through those to the best of your ability. And as always, be sure to reach out to me if you have any questions. Good luck.